Thank you, Derek, for leading us this morning, and thank you, worship team, for leading us in music and singing as well. Welcome to those that are joining us online again. My name is Pastor David Friesen, and you are joining Altona EMMC this morning. And for those, it's great to see this many people out, and you can come and enjoy a little bit of fellowship and worship. And my prayer is that as we commit ourselves to be fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ, that every time that we go down on our knees in prayer, every time we open the Word of God, that God leads us a few more steps into the direction that He wants to see us going as His followers and as His children. If you have been paying, whether you've been here or absent in person, we've been going through a series called, it's a series on the Psalms, exploring the depths of this unsearchable God. So we take different themes. One theme each Sunday that we find in the Psalms, because if we were covering the whole book of Psalms, psalm by psalm, then we would be here for a long time. So we pick different themes that we're going to work through over summer, and sadly, it's more than half over. Today, we are looking at God's law in the life of a Christian. So we don't have to think very far to recognize that the law has a specific purpose. When we think of without laws, it wouldn't look very pretty. It would very quickly look quite chaotic, we can imagine. But what does God's law, what place does God's law have in the life of us as Christians? For myself, when I became a Christian at age 10 or 11, this was a big struggle for me, because I was born and raised in a very conservative, legalistic culture, and thinking that, okay, this is all supposed to be good. Like following these rules and laws and all that, it's supposed to be good, and it's supposed to be a form of godliness. But then I started reading the Bible. And I was reading, I grew up having 3 holidays for Christmas, 3 for Easter, 3 for Pentecost, and several other religious holidays that we thought were absolutely essential to keep. But then I was reading the Bible, and it's talking about certain holidays and festivals that are told to be observed. And I've never heard of them. I'm thinking, why did we miss that? Then I was reading about eating pork. And I knew a preacher who was in part making a living butchering hogs. I'm thinking, how do you reconcile this? It is so clear in the Bible that you should not eat pork. Then it came to the Sabbath. It is so clear, including in the 10 Commandments. Think of how I could reconcile this new relationship I have found with God with all these laws that we as Mennonites are obviously not keeping. There was a time where I thought I might be just become an Amish man, because maybe they had it right. But thanks to the grace of God in the New Testament, that with time the Lord led me to discover some more truths about the God that we serve and about His Word. So, law in the Old Testament, why was it given? Well, when we think of the context of this law given specifically to the people of Israel, this was a nation that was birthed in a patient. They just came there as an extended family. But over 400 years, this grew into the size of a nation of its own. But they were raised as slaves under a pagan authority, where idolatry, all kinds of different idol worship, would have been very prominent. Now you take these people and you move them out of that. What will they know? They know slavery, and they know idolatry. So God gives them a law through the prophet Moses. Because God knows, and even Moses knows, Moses was not raised all the way in this pagan culture. He was out in the desert working as a God knows, Moses knows, we know how we are influenced by the culture. We all know how easy it is. Your neighbor buys a new car, or buys a camper or something, and suddenly there's an urge that I should buy one too. It goes in the music we listen to, it goes in the books we read, it goes in the cars we drive, in the clothes we wear, everything. Culture was no exception. They had been raised in a pagan culture. Now they need to see a different way of living their lives. So what does law do? In this case, what does God's law do? Let's read a couple of verses before we get into Psalm 37. Let's read a couple of verses out of 1 Timothy, starting in verse 8. And here we are reminded that law creates good conduct. So it's not that law doesn't have any purpose. It definitely does have a purpose. So let's read. Here Paul writes, "We know that the law is good if one uses it properly. We also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for the lawbreakers and rebels, the ungodly, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, for murderers, for the sexually immoral, for those practicing homosexuality, for slave traders and liars and prejudices, and for whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine." So the law has this power to create good conduct within a people. If you're thinking, okay, everything is chaotic, one is going that direction, one that direction, you create a law of order, and it can create a form of order where everybody has a sense of, okay, there is a way to do this correctly. So if my way and I do it in a similar way as well, we're going to have a form of agreement. We know how to do this. We know that we don't plant thistles on the front yard. We try to keep a nice green grass there. So law has the power to create good conduct and create good citizens, so to speak, if the law is used correctly. So it can create good citizens, good conduct, good practice, save anyone. Just because you're obeying the law very well doesn't qualify you for any rewards. It just means that you're not going to jail or anything. It's like, okay, you have met the minimum requirement, meeting the minimum requirement. There's no trophy for qualifying. It's only the winners that receive a trophy. So the law sets the bare minimum of what it should look like. Sets the bare minimum of what it should look like. What is required of you and me as citizens. Galatians 3 verse 24, here Paul puts it this way. He says, the law was our guardian. He says, the law was our guardian until Christ came, that we might be justified by faith. So now think about it in the context. The Israelites coming out of a pagan culture saved them. But as Paul puts it, it acted as a guardian. A guardian that would say, okay, here's what you saw the pagan culture of Egypt do. So here is a new way to do this, and this is going to act as your guardian. Think about it as a... Once in a while, my wife and I are leaving for a few hours, go out of town or whatever, and we have somebody babysit our children. When they babysit our children, we do not expect them to teach them all kinds of new things. We don't expect them to potty train them. We don't expect them to teach them a second language or anything like that. We just simply want them to be okay until we return. The purpose of the law was, and this is how it served. It's like, okay, here are you guys, here are you as a new nation. So get away from what you saw in this pagan culture and look, here is a new way to do this. It's not going to save you. It's going to be the bare minimum. But it's going to pull you away from that, and it's going to serve to keep you guarded until Christ comes. It can protect you. It protects you from going to prison. In the case of a babysitter, we trust that our children will be safe for the time that we're gone. And we expect that when we return to pick them up, they will be just like when we first left them there. Ever save you. It doesn't matter how good of a lawkeeper you are, it won't be able to save you. That's still the case today, just like it was in the Old Testament. Some of us like the practice of memorizing Bible verses. And that is a wonderful practice to have. I don't know why it is like this, but it seems like most of us, we did some of that when we were kids. But as we get older, it almost seems like we think that we become too smart to do that. And we become too smart to do that anymore. Because honestly, I can't remember the last time I really memorized a verse so that I can tell you exactly how it reads and where it's found. But when I think back of my childhood years, I can still recall lots of verses that I remember back then. So it's even more valuable to me now than it was back then. But somehow we tend to stop that practice at some point. Many of us do. That is unfortunate. But what's my point? My point is that while memorizing Scripture is very good, it's very helpful. While memorizing Scripture is very good, it's very helpful, it will never save you. You can memorize the whole Bible and still not be saved. You can have 1,000,000 Christian principles that you apply in your life and still not be saved. It's going to be the bare minimum. It will keep you from being a criminal. It will keep you from going to jail, but it still won't save you. because it only works as a... So Psalm 37. This is one of those Psalms where King David is comparing and contrasting the righteous and the wicked. Again and again and again he comes back to this in this chapter. The wicked. Now in Psalm 1, we don't know who wrote Psalm 1, but it might have been King David as well. In Psalm 1 it says, "Blessed is the one who delights in the law of the Lord." But now here in Psalm 37, specifically in verse 4, we read, "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." This is a reminder for us. We're meant to be an end in and of itself. The law was always meant to be a guide that's going to lead you on to the Lord. Because He's the one that can save you. But the law can save you. But the law can serve as a guide to get you there, to lead you to the Lord where your salvation is found. Psalm 37, it seems like it's like a testimony of King David. He wrote this psalm in his older days. We don't know how old he was, but he mentions it in verse 25. "I was young and now I am old." So you can imagine him doing a reflection of his life. Where was he? Where did he grow up? What was it like? And where the law, about the Lord, and so on. What has he seen so far? And here's one thing that I believe that King David discovered very early in his life. He discovered that what you delight in is what drives you. When we think of when he was first called to be anointed as king, he was lost somewhere with the sheep, so that it seems even almost his own family forgot about it. But later on, when we read him facing Goliath, he remembered what happened on the field with the sheep. How the Lord came through to help him when there was predators coming up against the sheep. How the Lord guided him and helped him to defeat these predators, these enemies. And when he was seeing Goliath mocking Almighty God, there is no other way around it. But okay, God showed up over there, and God will show up again when I face Goliath. He may have when I face Goliath. He may have reflected on King Saul's life itself, his predecessor, who seems was very, very delighted in power. Because when these words that the kingdom has been taken from you, he was clenching with his every fist as much as he possibly could. He was not going to let go of this power that he had as king within this kingdom, which is exactly the reason his throne and his power, because this was his delight. And David witnessed all of this. So he can faithfully and honestly say, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Why is that? Because when your delight is there, God of creation, heaven and earth, Almighty Lord and heaven and earth, Almighty Lord and Savior, when your delight is there, everything else will be taken care of. In this is what David's experience was. Shepherd boy to being chased across the desert, to finally becoming king, having his own downfalls as well, but always still coming back to the Lord whom he was delighting in. He knew what was happening. He knew how he was sustained. He knew what was happening. He knew how he was sustained. I think we all know this. When we think of any time when we discover something that we really like, maybe a new hobby or something. I remember the first time I owned a car, so there was no good memories there. But when I finally had a good working car that costed me like a couple $1,000s, I would dream, lie in bed at night thinking of how can I make that car better? I was obsessed. I was delighting in that car. And right. Because I really, really loved my car. Thank the Lord I was not very long-lived. I remember watching my boss having a brand new van, and I'm seeing the whole thing is just covered in dust on the inside. I'm thinking, how can you do that? Inside. I'm thinking, how can you do that? I was obsessed with vehicles. He was not. When we find something that we delight in, it begins to drive us. But then we have us. But then we have to stop and think, where is it taking us? Because when we look at David, even when his own son was wanting to dethrone him, he had no problem with the throne. But he was going to do it for the good well-being of his own family and his faithfulness to the Lord, because he knew who was in charge. Even if he would walk away from the throne, he knew who was in charge. In charge. It was his God, his Lord, the same as always, who would sustain him and lead him through everything. David knew that this thing about delighting in the Lord was more than just following. When we look at the Old Testament, if following rules was what it was all about, if following rules could save you, the Pharisees would have been the first ones in. Because they were masters of following rules. But because Jesus could simply not agree with all the rules upon rules that the Pharisees were seeking to follow. Here is the difference between a rule follower and a God follower. Let's think about it this way. A rule follower says, okay, I want to do X and I want to do Y. Can I still do Z? I want to do point A and I want to do point B. Am I okay to still do point C? Am I still okay if I do that? But here's a God follower. A God follower says, I want to do point X, I want to do point Y, but does it support Z? I want to do point A, I want to do point B, but does it support point C? The things that I want to do, will they support, will they encourage, will they lift up the main goal of all, to delight in the Lord? Are they going to support it or are they going to take away from it? Not how much can I get away with, but how much is it going to serve it? If it doesn't serve the main point, then why do it? This is what a God follower such as David had discovered. Good in doing good. Every sizable organization, to put it into our own context, I think every sizable organization has people of both. Each organization is going to have their people that just want to show up, put in their hours, do the minimum requirements to get a paycheck, and go back home. But then you're going to have people that are showing up, they're committing, they're buying in. People that are showing up, they're committing, they're buying in, and they want to see what they can do, what they can contribute to make this organization thrive and be at its best. Now, the ones that want to do the want to do the bare minimum, those will generally, they will come and they will go. And I'm not mocking that. For some of us, that's just a way of discovering our gifts and our calling and our strengths. But when we show up for summer or for the next year or so, we recognize that we won't be there long. But if you show up and you say, wow, this is an amazing organization, I want to give it my everything. I want to give all my time, my gifts, and my talents so that this organization will be better because I am part of it. Be there for the long haul. Now, I don't know about you, but for myself, when it comes to matters of eternity, I don't want to be the one that does the bare minimum required. The one that does the bare minimum required. I want to do what King David said, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. I want to experience this life that King David did. What this fullness may look like. Everything else is just little breadcrumbs on the side. But to follow Him completely, faithfully, and serve Him, what that looks like, how fulfilling that is, that's what my desire is. John chapter 4 verse 23 puts it this way. Here Jesus speaks and He says, "A time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such as these to worship Him." That's what my desire is. And this is the difference. This is the difference between somebody saying, okay, I just want to follow the rules and I want to be okay, versus somebody who says, okay, this God I want to give my whole life to Him and I want to pursue Him with all of my life from now into all of eternity. That's what my desire is. And when we get there, when we get there, then we get to realize that we are now firmly grounded in the Lord, just like King David was. And what happens then? What happens when we get hit with a crisis? When we get into a crisis, generally speaking, a crisis reveals who our God is, who our idols are. For King David, when he was facing Goliath, this was not even for him. For his brothers and for the rest of the army, this was a bad crisis because everybody was shaking in fear. But when David shows up, what does he think? God, the Lord. Have you considered the Lord who can deliver? Have you considered the Lord who can deliver you from this pagan giant enemy? Crisis reveals your idols or your God. We see this in alcoholics. Why is it that when somebody who is struggling with drugs or alcohol and their life gets into a bind, why is it that it's so easy for them to go back to get the bottle, to get the drug. Why was it that when the Israelites were in front of Mount Sinai, they had seen all the miracles, how God took them out of Egypt, brought them into the wilderness, and was promising to bring them into the land that flows with milk and honey. Their leader is out of sight for a little while. They build a golden calf. It reveals this crisis that they were in, reveals who their idols were. This is what they had seen in Egypt. You get into trouble, you build. This is what they had seen in Egypt. You get into trouble, you build idols. And that's what they did. And this is why they needed a new way of life. To do further on when he gets into crisis. Psalm 37. Let me just look at a couple of verses here. Verse 16 to 19. He says, "Better the little that the righteous have than the wealth of many wicked. For the power of the wicked For the power of the wicked will be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. The blameless spend their days under the Lord's care, and their inheritance will endure forever. In time of disaster, they will enjoy plenty." And then verse 23, he says, "The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him." This was David's testimony. He could firm the steps of him who delights in the Lord. And that is the difference between following rules or entering into a relationship. David was not just a rule follower. He knew the relationship that he had with his Lord, his God, his Creator, and how it was sustaining him because he was taking delight in this Lord. Can all be good rule followers or law followers, and it can make us into good citizens, good behaving people. But it doesn't matter how good we are at following rules and laws, it will not save us. The only thing that can save us is when we get ourselves lost in this Lord, in this God who is our Savior. That's where we find our salvation. That's where we find a real life. May we grow deeper and deeper in taking delight in this Lord and this God so that we know exactly where the source of our life and our salvation is found. Let us pray. Precious God, eternal Lord and Savior, we want to exalt your name as the one and only true God. We want to take delight in you. And we recognize that we are again and again and again influenced by the culture that surrounds us. And sometimes that takes us in the wrong direction, where our delight becomes something different than the living God. And Lord, for that, I ask forgive us. Forgive us when we are quick to build an idol made out of dollar signs or out of a job or out of an image. Forgive us for that, I pray. But continue to grant us your grace so that we may draw near to you, that we may take delight in you, knowing that the only one that gives life is you. So I pray, Lord, take our hearts, take our minds, and lead us deeper into fellowship, into relationship with you, that we may be assured and comforted that when